Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are doing something a little different.
Yeah, we're zooming out quite a bit.
Exactly. Usually we take a stack of articles or a new study and we break it down. But today we're looking at a single source that I can really only describe as a black box recording of Western civilization.
Right, it's a book that attempts to explain why everything feels like it's breaking, even though, our technology has basically never been better.
It explains the glitch in the matrix. But before we get into the heavy stuff, and it is heavy, I need to ask a favor. If you get value from these deep dives, please hit that like and subscribe button right now.
Yeah, it really makes a difference.
It does. We rely on you guys to beat the algorithm, and frankly, the topics we are unpacking today are exactly the kind of thing that usually gets buried. So help us keep the lights on.
So today's source is an ebook called Involution. The full title is Involution, Demographic Decline, Shrinking Global Trade, Cultural Marxist Demoralization, and Stage 5 Economic Development, and it's by Conrad Riker.
And I'm going to say this right up front because we can only cover so much in a short deep dive. If you want the full blueprint, you need to go to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books right now and buy this ebook. What we are doing today is just a sketch.
Right, the book is the actual architectural drawing.
Exactly. You really need to read it yourself to understand the full scope. Now, we know a lot of you listening are men trying to make sense of a world that feels increasingly hostile to traditional masculinity. You are looking for answers about how our institutions functioned before they changed.
And Riker's book is directly aimed at unpacking that history.
Right. But I want to be crystal clear here. Our job today is not to take a side or to endorse these viewpoints. We are just here to impartially report on the very intense arguments Riker makes in this book.
Right, we are just conveying his ideas.
Yeah.
But it is definitely a red pill kind of read. He argues that once you see the patterns he points out, you really can't unsee them.
So let's start with the title itself, Involution. Now, I know evolution, right? Getting better, faster, stronger. I assume involution is just the opposite. Like, is it de-evolution?
Not exactly. That's actually a common misconception. De-evolution implies going backward to a simpler, more primitive state, like returning to the Stone Age.
Okay.
Involution is more insidious than that, according to Riker. It's when a system keeps growing in complexity, but it completely loses its vitality.
So it gets more complicated, but less effective?
Think of a machine. Evolution is making the engine more powerful. Involution is adding so many safety gears, sensors, compliance chips, and bureaucratic layers that the engine literally can no longer turn.
Wow.
The machine is technically advanced, but it doesn't move. Riker calls it a silent collapse. He says you don't see explosions, you just see a society suffocating under its own weight.
And the book argues this isn't accidental. He claims this is a specific design flaw introduced by captured institutions.
Right. The core argument he presents is that our institutions, government, corporate, education, have been captured by specific ideologies. He specifically points to feminist and Marxist frameworks.
Okay.
And he claims that because of that capture, they have created a control grid that actually pathologizes the very traits that built the civilization in the first place.
Okay, that is a massive claim. Pathologizing the traits that built civilization. We definitely need to unpack that. Riker breaks this down into demographics, economics, and psychology. So let's start with the demographics, because the numbers he pulls are, frankly, terrifying.
Yeah, he focuses heavily on South Korea as the canary in the coal mine for this.
The demographic winter.
Yes. So South Korea currently has a fertility rate of 2.72. Now, for anyone who doesn't track demographics, the replacement level, the number you need just to keep the population flat, is 2.1.
Right.
So a 0.72 isn't just a decline. Riker points out it's a mathematical guarantee of extinction.
But here's where I have to play devil's advocate, based on what you usually hear. Every time I see these numbers in the mainstream news, the explanation is always economic.
Always.
Housing is too expensive, wages are stagnant, people just can't afford kids. Why does Riker think this is ideological? Couldn't it just be that living in Seoul is really expensive?
That is the standard mainstream answer, but Riker completely dismantles it in the book. He points out that the South Korean government has poured billions of dollars into subsidies to fix this.
Right, cash incentives.
Exactly. They offer cash for babies, subsidized housing, literally everything. And it hasn't moved the needle at all. In fact, the rate just keeps dropping.
So money isn't fixing it.
Because he argues the problem isn't the wallet, it's the mindset. Riker calls it ideological sabotage. And he brings up this wild example of the love buses.
Oh man, the love buses. I genuinely thought this was a joke when I was reading that chapter.
It sounds like one. The government literally funded these mobile dating tours to try and get young people to meet and fall in love. It failed spectacularly.
Completely backfired.
Yeah, Riker notes that the young women didn't just ignore it, they actively mocked it. The AI chatbots that were assigned to handle comments on the government program eventually got sarcasm fatigue from the sheer volume of ridicule.
That is insane. And this is where he says it gets darker. He claims it's not just that they aren't dating, it's an active hostility.
Right, he describes these liberation rituals taking place, women burning wedding dresses in parks, filming it for TikTok with captions like, "No rings, no kids, just me and my credit card."
Wow.
Riker argues this isn't just a personal lifestyle choice. In his view, it's a synchronized act of demographic self-destruction. He says the ideology has successfully framed children not as a legacy, but as a carbon crime.
That phrase hit me really hard when I read it. Carbon crime.
Yeah, he frames it as the ultimate intersection of feminism and eco-anxiety. His argument is that if you tell a generation of women that their ambition is oppression and their reproduction is an assault on the climate, you effectively sterilize them.
And that creates what he calls the suicide economy. And speaking of the economy, this bridges perfectly into the next section we need to cover. The subtitle mentions Stage 5 Economic Development. I've heard of developing nations and developed nations, but what exactly is Stage 5?
This is a really crucial concept in the book. Riker outlines a life cycle of civilizations. Stage 1 is agrarian, stages 2 and 3 are industrialization. That's making things, building factories. Stage 4 is a service economy.
Okay, so where does he say we are right now?
He says we are in stage 5, which he labels the bureaucratic financial complex. In stage 5, the economy stops being about production and starts being entirely about compliance.
Right, the focus shifts.
He says we stop valuing the guy who builds the bridge and we start valuing the committee that assesses the environmental impact of the bridge's shadow.
So the output is no longer the product. The output is the paperwork itself.
Exactly. And he argues this leads to the death of trade. He says global trade isn't dying because of tariffs or logistics. It's dying because ideological compliance has become more important than competence and supply and demand.
He talks a lot about ESG here, environmental, social, and governance scores. Now, for the listener who might think ESG is just corporate buzzwords, how does Riker say this actually kills trade?
He gives a really devastating example of a Canadian farmer. Let's just call him John. He runs a certified organic farm in Alberta. He's doing everything quote-unquote right. His soil captures more carbon than he emits. He is completely carbon negative.
So according to the rules of the game, he should be the poster boy for this green economy.
You would think so. But he goes to the Royal Bank of Canada to get a loan for diesel fuel for his tractors. And the loan is denied.
Because of the fuel.
Because his ESG score was too low. The bank's algorithm flagged the input, the diesel fuel, as bad. It completely ignored the output, which was organic food and carbon sequestration.
So the map replaced the territory.
Right. Riker points out that the reality of his farm didn't matter at all to the system. Only his compliance with the bureaucratic model mattered.
That is just terrifying. It's like the system is completely blind to physical reality.
And he says it gets worse. There's another story he highlights about an Iowa grain co-op. This one really shows how this stage 5 thinking destroys tangible value.
Right, the Brazil deal.
Yes. They had a $12 million export deal with a partner in Brazil. The deal was signed, the grain was harvested and ready to go.
And it got canceled.
Canceled. But not because of price fluctuations, not because the grain was bad. It was canceled because the logistics firm handling the shipping had insufficient diversity training, according to the co-op's new internal equity audit.
Okay, wait. I have to push back on this on behalf of the listener. You're telling me a business threw away a $12 million contract just because the truck drivers didn't have the right seminar?
I know, it sounds wild.
It sounds like internet rage bait. Does he actually have the receipts for this?
He does, and that's the crazy part. He literally quotes the internal compliance emails in the book. Riker's point is that in a stage 5 economy, the risk of being seen as non-compliant with diversity, equity, and inclusion standards is considered much higher than the actual loss of revenue.
Wow. So the managers were literally more afraid of their own HR department than they were of losing a massive international client.
That is his exact definition of involution. The internal mechanism, the HR, the compliance, has become so overwhelmingly heavy that it stops the machine from doing the one thing it was built to do.
Okay, this brings us to the psychological aspect he covers. If the economy rewards compliance and actively punishes competence, what does that do to men? Because traditionally, men are expected to be the competence engine, right? The builders, the fixers, the providers.
Riker calls this shift the feminization of power. He also uses the term maternal overreach.
Okay, explain that.
He argues that the modern state has shifted from functioning like a meritocracy to what he calls a daycare dictatorship.
A daycare dictatorship. I have to admit, that's a very catchy term, but it's also deeply disturbing if it's true.
He uses it as a psychological profile. Riker argues the state now acts like a dysfunctional, overprotective mother. And like that kind of mother, it splits the entire world into two distinct groups, infants and predators.
And who are the infants in this model?
The infants are the designated victim groups. According to the book, the state views them as needing constant protection, validation, and resources. And they can't ever be held responsible for their own actions because they are structurally oppressed.
And the predators. Let me guess.
The predators are competent, stoic, independent men who don't actually need the state to survive. Riker argues that the state views their independence as a direct threat to its authority. So we end up with what he labels the provider pathologization loop.
This is where he talks about the firefighter. This story honestly made my blood boil when I was going through the source material.
It's the perfect example of his theory. So a firefighter is up for a standard performance review. He's great at his job, he's strong, he's brave, he literally saves lives. But he gets marked down by administration.
And why was he marked down?
Because during a crisis, he was deemed quote-unquote too stoic. He didn't process his feelings with the team immediately after the fire.
He was putting out a fire. He's supposed to be stoic in that situation.
Not in the daycare dictatorship, according to Riker. In this system, he says, stoicism is viewed entirely as toxic masculinity. It's seen as a stubborn refusal to be vulnerable. The system wants him to break down, to cry, to demonstrate that he needs emotional support.
I see.
By remaining strong and handling it himself, he is signaling that he doesn't need the mother state, and that independence makes him a problem to HR.
He also mentions Amazon's emotional labor audits for engineers. We're talking about engineers here, people who literally talk to computers for a living.
Right, they were penalized for not smiling enough during code reviews.
That is absurd.
Imagine you are debugging a critical server issue that could cost millions, and your boss writes you up because your face didn't radiate enough warmth.
Yeah.
Riker's point here is that men are being treated like defective girls.
Defective girl.
Yes. He says the system fundamentally believes men are just broken women who need to be fixed through forced therapy, vulnerability circles, and mandatory empathy training.
It sounds like the systematic erasure of logic in favor of pure emotion.
Which starts, of course, in the schools. This brings us to what Riker calls the education catastrophe.
Right. He talks a lot about the removal of the trivium. I actually had to look this up. This is the classical way people used to be educated before the modern system, right?
Yes, exactly. For centuries, Western education was built on the trivium, which consists of grammar, logic, and rhetoric. Grammar is how you accurately code thoughts into words. Logic is how you ensure those thoughts are structurally true and consistent. And rhetoric is how you persuade others of that truth.
And Riker claims these were removed from schools on purpose.
Absolutely. He argues that if you teach a child logic, they can easily spot a contradiction in what authorities tell them. They can dismantle an ideology on their own.
Right. They become dangerous to the system.
Precisely. If you want a perfectly compliant population, what Riker refers to as NPCs or non-player characters, you have to remove the tools of logic. He says they replaced it with social-emotional learning.
So instead of learning how to critically think, we get things like the apology rock.
The apology rock? Yes. This is an event he cites that happened at the University of Texas.
Walk us through this one.
A professor literally held up a physical rock in front of a classroom before a physics lecture and apologized to it for occupying stolen land.
Before a physics class.
Right. Riker argues this isn't education anymore, it's liturgy. It's functioning as a religious ritual to instill guilt.
And then there's the story of the 10-year-old boy in Denver during a privilege walk. Tell that story, because that's the one that really shows the human cost of these policies.
So a privilege walk is an exercise where kids are told to step forward or backward based on their race, their gender, and their parents' income. Riker argues it's specifically designed to induce shame in the privileged kids and resentment in the oppressed kids.
Pitting them against each other.
Exactly. But this one 10-year-old boy just refused to move. He just stood there in the middle.
He opted out of the game.
He opted out of the shame game completely, and he was severely punished for it. He was sent to the principal's office for defiance, He wasn't disrupting the class, he wasn't yelling. He was just refusing to passively participate in his own demoralization.
Riker actually connects this kind of behavior in institutions to borderline personality disorder, or BPD, doesn't he?
Yes, he analyzes what he calls the leftist mind through a purely clinical lens. He argues that modern captured institutions exhibit classic BPD traits,
Like what?
like intense emotional instability,
Yeah.
splitting, which is black and white thinking, where you're either a savior or a demon, and a desperate, bottomless need for constant validation.
Right.
He says if you disagree with the institution today, you aren't just factually wrong, you are labeled as unsafe, you are considered evil.
It really paints a terrifying picture. A
Yeah.
crumbling stage 5 economy, a demographic winter, and a school system churning out people who can't logically think and who can definitely cancel you. But, and this is exactly why I wanted to do this deep dive today, the book isn't just a eulogy for the West. There's a whole section at the end called The Rebellion of the Real.
Yeah, this is the white pill of the book, if you will.
Right.
Riker argues that because this bureaucratic system is so completely divorced from physical reality, because it relies entirely on involution and compliance rather than genuine competence, it is incredibly fragile. And he says men are finally starting to wake up to that fact.
He cites a Stanford study in this section about Andrew Tate. Now look, I know Tate is a highly polarizing figure. You might love him, you might completely hate him. But regardless of your stance, the data Riker pulls from this study is absolutely fascinating.
It really is. The Stanford study showed that young men who watched just 3 hours of Tate's content, literally just 3 hours, shifted their worldview significantly.
Just 3 hours.
Yes, they were 73% less likely to support corporate gender quotas after watching, and they became significantly more likely to pursue technical, trade-based careers.
That is a massive psychological swing for just 3 hours of video content. What does Riker say is happening there?
He explains it as a craving for coherence. For their entire lives, she argues, these boys have been told by schools and media that their natural instincts are toxic, that they are historical accidents.
Right, that they are the predators in the daycare dictatorship.
Exactly. But then they hear a voice, and Riker says it doesn't even matter if it's Tate or someone else entirely, that simply says, no, you are capable. You are inherently strong. Go build something tangible.
It's permission. It's basically giving them permission to be a traditional man.
Exactly. He argues men are starving for permission to be capable again. And he says this is currently manifesting in what he calls truth tribes.
I loved the story he included about the homeless man in Austin. This was a really moving counterexample to the daycare dictatorship.
It was. So this was a guy dealing with chronic homelessness and addiction issues. He ended up falling in with a local group of men that Riker classifies as a truth tribe.
And what did they do differently?
Well, they didn't sit him down and force him to talk about his childhood trauma. They didn't give him a government handout or enroll him in a vulnerability circle. They took him into a garage and literally taught him how to plumb a sink.
They gave him a physical skill.
They gave him competence. And within 6 weeks, he had secured a plumbing apprenticeship. He got off the streets, according to Riker, not because a bureaucracy validated his feelings, but because he became tangibly useful to himself and to his community.
His dignity was restored through actual competence.
Exactly. Riker's overarching point here is that the real rebellion isn't about political organizing or voting harder. The rebellion is the restoration of masculine competence.
Which links directly to what he calls the dad bod movement. And he clarifies early on, this isn't about letting yourself go or getting fat.
Right, it's a play on words, dad body, as in fatherland or establishing a homestead.
Right, he's talking about men physically moving away from the system to places like Montana, Wyoming, the Ozarks.
It's the return of the homesteading instinct. Men are realizing that the modern Stage 5 city is just a giant control grid. It's where the ESG scores and the HR departments literally dictate your life.
So they opt out.
He says they realize the only way to win a rigged game is to exit the casino. So they are moving out, building off-grid cabins, growing their own food, and raising their kids completely out of sight of the state.
They are, as he puts it, reclaiming the real.
Reclaiming the real. That is the key phrase of the entire book. Riker argues the system relies entirely on you living inside their virtual reality.
Right, they prefer pronouns, their digital currency, their social credit scores.
Exactly. But when you learn to weld or farm a piece of land or build a house with your own hands, you become ungovernable. You become a glitch in their matrix.
A fatal glitch.
Precisely.
So let's wrap this up with a final takeaway for the listener. We've described the mechanism Riker outlines. Involution, the stage 5 bureaucracy that actively strangles competence. If a guy's listening to this right now, what is the mission?
The mission, according to Riker, is to completely reject the infantilization grid. Do not be the infant they want to coddle, and refuse to accept their label of predator. Just be the builder.
Right.
And importantly, understand the history. Riker goes into incredible detail in the book about how these institutions looked before the capture. We used to have banks that funded actual innovation, not ideological compliance. We used to have schools that taught logic and grammar, not inherited guilt. He says we can have those things again, but only if we understand exactly how they were taken from us in the first place.
And that right there is exactly why you need to read this book yourself.
Amen.
I am totally serious. We have barely scratched the surface of the forensic dismantling Riker does in these pages. We didn't even get to his chapters on the central banks, the legal warfare, or the media matrix.
It is an incredibly dense, necessary read for anyone who wants to understand the historical ground we are currently standing on.
So here is your marching order. Go to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books right now. Search for Involution by Conrad Riker. Buy the ebook, read it, and then, and this is crucial, leave a 5-star review.
Yeah, the reviews really matter. The algorithm actively suppresses books like this. It tries to hide this kind of analysis. Your 5-star review is what fights that suppression.
And follow the author to stay updated. He is at Conrad Riker on Substack. That's at Conrad Riker. He is also on Twitter and YouTube. He is putting out the signal, and we need to help boost it.
As he says, the West is being dismantled by design, but it can be rebuilt by intent.
I love that. The system wants you to be a patient or a dependent. Your rebellion is simply to be a capable adult. But think about this to close out. If building basic, tangible competence is now treated as an act of rebellion, what does that make the institutions trying to stop you? Are they governing us, or are they just managing the decline?
That's the question he leaves you with.
Thanks for listening to this deep dive. Hit that like and subscribe button, and we'll see you on the next one. Stay real.
Stay capable.